They hang the man and flog the woman that steal the goose from off the common. But let the greater villain loose that steals the common from the goose. The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leave the lords and ladies fine who take things that are yours and mine. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Red Diaper Baby, a show about capitalism, crisis, and childcare. You can find out how to follow the show on all your social medias and listen to more episodes at rdbshow.com. I'm Ben, here with my co-host, Brynn. What's up, Brynn?
Hey, how are you?
Oh, I am great. I just had a long week of, nannying because, both of us are childcare workers, and we're also from Seattle, Washington, and I don't know. I have done another podcast. You have been on your husband's podcast many times. We are both podcast 30-somethings, and I'm a podcasting American.
Yeah.
And I don't know. You were on my show once, and I just had such a great time. I thought, why don't we have a show about what it's like to be a nanny, and also how it, informs how we understand the world. So, Brynn, how did you get into childcare? This is so weird, but yes, how did you get into childcare, and who are you?
Well, again, I'm Brynn, podcaster wife, now own podcaster.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I got into childcare when I was 16. I needed a job, and a family member of a family member said that they were hiring at her child's daycare, and I went in and interviewed with the owner. She sat me on the floor, handed me a baby, and then started asking me questions, and then gave me a job. And I worked there until I was 21, 16 to 21 when I moved to Seattle. So, yeah. And then I've just, taught, and, I've been in the field for, far over a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a real childcare veteran. I guess I'm a childcare veteran too. Is that stealing valor to say we're veterans? I think, in my experience, working at daycares, especially when they get to those limits of how many kids can legally be in a room, it's kind of a war zone. So I don't think that's really unreasonable. But
no, it is somebody fed gremlins after midnight.
Yes,
that's what I like to describe it as. Yeah, it is. We're the true veterans. Fuck the service of the military. We are the veterans.
Exactly. I'd like to see a special forces guy change 2 diapers at once, like I have.
No shit.
Or deal with a diaper that if you squish the back too hard, the poop starts flying up in.
Or it already has, and then you have to contain all the poop.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, that's you got to contain the fecal zone, as they would call
exactly.
it.
Yes. This is a high, what do they say? This is a high kinetic activity zone. And we have to take our focus, and we have to execute, cleanup time, huddle together, squad. But yeah. So I'm Ben. I have worked in childcare for not quite a decade, almost a decade, here and there. But I used to work at an elementary school for a period of time, and then I went to college, and then I dropped out of college, and then I decided to try other things that were not childcare, and that was not fun. And it was, apparently you don't get paid a lot with a lot of jobs, which you also don't get paid a lot in childcare. But I kind of fell back into childcare in my mid 20s, and it was just it just made a lot more sense to me than just giving people cigarettes at a convenience store. It had a lot more meaning, And I worked at a daycare center for many years and was like a lead teacher, whatever that means.
Exactly.
We can get into those like weird hierarchies that they used to kind of like split solidarity. But then I got into nannying, which is what I've been doing now for about 4 years now. And it has been a very it fits me more than working in a childcare center. But you know, it's a hard job, and you're kind of isolated. And that's kind of how you and me got closer. It's just like reaching out and sort of going through that process together. And I think we both like tried to help each other with finding jobs and stuff. And
solidarity, brother.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough world, but you know, we're both like lefties. You know, I don't know if you have like a very specific ideology you just describe your worldview as. I just say I'm like a socialist or a Marxist. I don't want to get too. That's just basically what I say.
We'll say that's our household. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In this house, we believe in the labor theory of value.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, so that's the perspective we're coming from, hence the name.
As we, you know, wrap up our personal histories, we'd like to go into the actual history of education in the U.S., which is extremely large and has many avenues, but we tried to pare it down as much as possible so that as we go forward, you know, you've got a bit of context for situations and yeah,
exactly. And kind of where we're coming from. And, you know, we recognize that this is not the history of all childcare, and there is no way us two weirdos will be able to. Sorry if I called you a weirdo.
No, I am a weirdo. Yeah.
Hey, thank you very much. That if we cannot cover everything you want, you know, hey, send us an email at rdbshow@gmail.com. That's right. If you have a question, please send it to us there. And you can follow us at RDB Show on Twitter. And I don't, you know, like just don't be weird. Like, just don't be weird.
If you're just
like,
way too weird, we won't respond. Yeah. But if you actually have something worthwhile to say, God, that sounds terrible. But just don't be weird. So
just don't be weird. Like I understand a lot of you people out there. You think the internet is just for being weird, but guess what? Kids are on the internet. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself for posting all those memes. Yeah, how dare you?
Don't be a well actually kind of guy or a gotcha.
Don't be a well actually weirdo. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Those are the words. But if there's something that like we haven't touched on that like, you know, you'd be interested in, send us an email our way and we'll do our best to touch on that. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, before we get into this, hey, actually, let's just get into it.
Yeah. All right. Should we start like the dollop? 1890.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Yes. Do it.
Yeah. The date is, or the year, 1890, the Gilded Age.
Dun, dun, dun. Oh, everything was gilded, right? That's why they called it that. And it was gilded with guilds, like different collections of groups. No, wait, that's a different.
Children were gilded.
They were gilded with coal, actually.
They were gilded with coal and poverty.
Yeah, lots of poverty. So, okay. So we're going to try to start in like the 1890s, right?
Yeah,
because I think that's an important inflection point. If you're talking about sort of, I would say like the modern conception of childcare and also, well, really sort of the last age, right? Before the modern conception of childcare became more common. But also, I think it's an important age to think about because as I was talking with you, Brynn, it's very similar to right now, right?
Oh, absolutely.
In the Gilded Age, it was an era, you know, sort of post-Reconstruction. the and after the rise of industrial capitalism, right?
Yeah.
So, and there were these new gigantic fortunes made off of certain industries and people monopolizing on technology. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound familiar at all? Based off of things like logistics
Mm-hmm.
and certain commodity monopolies. I wonder, does this sound familiar to you? There was massive inequality. I don't know. I
Has that
can't think
ever
of anything
happened before?
similar. Has this ever happened before? I have no idea. There was a use of white supremacy to break the working class. Does that sound familiar? I don't know.
Yeah, another, that's very similar, and it seems to be this continuous loop is this urge to control people by morals and and a moral panic within the children, right? Save the children.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
So and at this time, like the thought of like it really started because the Protestants hate the Catholics and the immigrants are Catholics, so we can't be mixing the two because you can't have the poor with the non-poors. My God.
Right. Yeah. Just to help people out there. This is the time when it actually was considered racist to be mean to Irish people. That's how long ago this was. Okay.
Yeah.
I can say that because I come from Irish, Catholic, and Jewish people. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
So
yeah. All right. There we go. There we go.
Well, yeah. So I mean, it's that again, the moralness. Like the Catholics are, in their eyes, the cause of all criminals, under the Catholic Church. So
right.
Morally they're bad.
Yes. And, how do you think that was used kind of, because this is a thing I like to think about a lot, especially when you go back into history. And I think this can tie into childcare. How do you think that sort of like moralism of the ruling class was used sort of like almost as a way to create legitimacy for whatever they had, right? To create legitimacy for the fact that, they had these giant fortunes built off of like slavery and monopoly, right?
Well, exactly. We've had this, elitism for a long time. And especially as, capitalism takes a large hold, also does elitism. And so it's really forcing upon the working class, they're below, and we got to do something about those insects, right?
Right. Yes.
We have to. We're the elite, so we know better. These poors don't know anything. So, I think that's also like a way to, it was also a way to control and dictate what the poor do because they can't. They're too dumb to decide things for themselves. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that actually, I recently read the latest Thomas Frank book, The People Know, and he talks about the sort of history of the populist movement or the People's Party, which was kind of like the closest thing in American history that we had to like. It was the most successful third party since the Republican Party replaced the Whigs, right? And this was a manifestation of that sort of attempt at building class politics. And it's very interesting to sort of hear how it spoke and how they spoke about those movements then. And a lot of the things that these folks were asking for are, well, very similar to the kinds of things we're asking for now. They were asking for like universal programs and for protections for like farmers and for industrial workers, and they were asking for basically like proto civil rights laws. And it's really interesting how it was eventually crushed, but in like all left-wing parties in America tend to be, but that they were able to I think in that struggle, and while they were definitely crushed, and a lot of their ideas eventually maybe came to pass in some way, like getting off the gold standard, which was like a tool used to just amass massive fortunes for the rich, and then basically make the money that working people get just to be just chump change. And then also how, as a reaction to that, they basically codified what we later knew to be Jim Crow laws, and sort of how all these things interacted, but how these struggles, I think, while they were hard and they didn't seem to win right at the start, a lot of those visions that came out of a lot of these movements became really definitional, not just to like the American left, but to like the mid-century idea of what made America good at all. It's so funny, right? How like these people were the scum of the earth to the ruling class of that era, and then come 1950, everyone, it's all rah America, where anyone can make it, and we're more equal than ever.
We'll make it after all.
Yeah, exactly. But sort of, this is the thing that kind of blows my mind when I think about this, especially as someone who, I live my life dealing with things with little humans that are in childhood.
Right.
The idea around the family and childhood of it was not really, it wouldn't be super recognizable to us, right?
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, at that time, like the concept of childhood didn't exist really. Like, I mean, as a child or a family member, I mean, you were another worker to put food in your mouth. Like the concept of childhood and playing and things and educating you, like you got educated on how to work,
Right.
And so this concept of family is like far different. But, I'm looking at my notes. So this is the start of what modern childhood like might look like. These children are working all the time. They're going to work with their parents. And so they're also put in a lot of dangerous situations, because a lot of these jobs are dangerous. Being poor was dangerous. So, and this is also where the actual like very singular gender specific women in the home and childbearing, like at least the modern view on what motherhood is and what family is. And
and even like before that, like it's even more unclear. I remember in one of the articles that I sent you, sort of, it's the thing I hadn't really thought about, but even sort of in like the antebellum period, the way that childcare was done on like plantation houses was actually a little different than I think I thought it was. Like, it was just, like, as certain classes of people are viewed as tools and instruments to basically increase the value of your plantation, like that then meant that in some ways the kids would grow up together, but then in these very sort of, still obviously like caste and, racialized ways, but
that's the early, that's how the white children in there were raised and taught to, run the business. You've got to have control over, the slaves. And that's where they learned it, right? They learned it at an early age, and a lot of children learned it from their mothers, right? And playing, say two little girls. Yeah. I mean, one does one wrong, and then that's that opportunity for them to, punish that child, the slave child. There's, and maybe we'll get into it another time, but there's a book that we've got that tells a story about this exact thing, and it's really horrifying. But
I mean, shocker! Slavery was traumatic. I don't know if anyone
Well,
knows that.
yeah, and touching back like to your point and how different, and especially in this age, is like North and South, right?
Right.
Education was more in the West, was more popular in the West, but the idea of what education looked like in the South is that, how to run the plantation. Because why do you need an education when you already have the money? There's that thought of education equals money, right?
Right.
And well, if you've already got money, then the only education you need is how to control other people.
Right. Yeah. Which is kind of funny. I realize this might be going backwards, but it does show in many ways how not far away, even, in this supposedly, post Enlightenment, rational, liberal democracy that America sort of has as its sort of idea of its founding, how feudal a lot of these practices are and sort of are still very rooted in some of those understandings. So, that was a transition period. So in some ways it's important to think about how maybe we ourselves are in one of those kinds of transition periods now. But these ideas around childhood, and also I think the civil unrest that was happening in the Gilded Age, I think, probably while a lot of the people who eventually became the leaders in sort of the next era would probably not have been exactly like pro Eugene Debs or some of the other like strikers or some of the like militant anarchists. But it's an important reminder of how militant action can lead to changes for the better as we go into the progressive era. Where the progressive era sort of, which as you write down in the notes, it's not exactly like there's a hard line between the sort of the progressive era and the Gilded Age. It's the turn of the century, right? And after sort of the end of westward expansion, which of course has a lot of baggage to say the least.
Oh yeah,
in Seattle, so like let's be real.
Oh yeah, like that in itself could be like 5 episodes.
Exactly, right? Yes. I have an idea for a guest actually, but we will get to that later. But but the the sort of the growth of sort of the progressive movement, which is sort of I think taking some of the ideas of the populist movement, but instead of it being as democratic and as working class and immigrant and post-Reconstruction Black focused. It was more from the elite. It was in many ways you could think of someone like the obvious example of someone like Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Exactly,
like someone who was super pro imperialism, super pro capitalism, but wanted to have some tweaks because he saw how the previous eras how the previous era handled these social problems, which just going to lead to like complete revolution. And he was like, hey, I'm a rich guy, I don't want to fuck with that. I love America, bully ho, or whatever the fuck he says. I'm gonna go to Cuba and do some dumb shit. I'm not a fan of TR. I know a lot of people like him. He seems like a real piece of shit. His cousin, his wheelchair bound cousin was so much cooler. But that's a whole nother subject. But yeah. So sort of what as these reforms and changes started, how did that affect the idea of the family and and childhood?
Right. So yeah, during the progressive era, as we're coming out of of Reconstruction, you have widows and poor people, and they're working, right? And they obviously have children. Well, you got to do something, like I said earlier, you got to do something with the children. And, they're either in, going to work with the mothers or the parents, or they're working themselves. But it also led to this is a cause and a reason to really reevaluate what the idea of family is during that time. I mean, as some might say, the children were wild.
Oh no.
And that's where you get, it's more than a Disney movie, but that's where you get like Newsies and,
Right.
you've got also like what they call little mothers, watching, children watching children, right?
Right.
And so basically it's like all these children are running amok and they're all poor. So what do you do with them? You have to consolidate them and put them in one place. And of course, because they're poor and, being poor means in the elitist eyes that you have no manners and no class. Well, you have no class.
Literally. Yeah.
It's a way of, pushing bourgeoisie values onto the poor because, they need to learn how to act right. So, I mean, like, that's basically, as we blast into the progressive era, kind of what that looks like. And then, like I said, with every step, it seems to be a moral panic, amongst of what to do with the children, save the children. Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because this, the idea of these wild children around as kind of it was almost like they had to create kind of a sense of like that this is a threat. Like it wasn't built on this idea that like, because in the populist movement, there was actually a lot of an embrace of education as a role to empower people and it being a good for the individual person as well as for the working class. When it comes to sort of these reforms being done more from the top versus that sort of empowerment, radical education as sort of more, rooted in, I would say in like socialist and probably some anarchist thought. This sort of, it becomes about controlling the children, right? And it becomes about how we can make it okay for our bourgeois values for the PMC of its era,
Yeah.
And the ways that they can pathologize working class people and working class families. And it's interesting because when I think about that as like a route and a way that these reforms and these institutions can be used, it makes me think about, like a thing that is done a lot. I still remember growing up, like hearing about, I mean, gosh, it's a cliche sort of about like the underclass ideology or the bell curve, basically these pseudoscientific ways of naturalizing hierarchy and race science, right?
I was just gonna say,
right. Which of course
into eugenics,
and of course the progressive era was a real. If you were a race scientist, like you were doing good. Like business was booming for race science.
Oh, we just watched Django Unchained last night, and the part where Leo has that skull in the phrenology. My God,
right? Yeah, the skull. Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. Yes, get out the calipers, Leo. Maybe he should get out the ID checker for his girlfriends. Am I right?
I mean, he likes them.
Yeah, he likes them real young.
Speaking of children,
and disposable. Yeah, and also speaking of how labor was handled in that era. Yes, exactly. Right. But seriously though, like the way that like these pathologies were used and sort of as a way to explain the unrest and the inequality of the time versus like, I don't know, the fact that like Carnegie had like, like so much more money than any of these other people, like, or the fact that like there weren't any like worker protections or like labor unions were being shot by Pinkertons,
Exactly. I mean, like, the progressive era is, basically, trade unions and striking. And, this is the birth of, OSHA, due to the triangle shirtwaist fire,
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
yeah, which that's a whole other one with, that deal with children as well.
Right. Yeah,
That's
no
a whole
kidding.
other thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So then, that it's an interesting way to think about how the ruling class can use these policies and use the idea of children as a way to reinforce a lot of really bad ideas.
Yeah.
But so in this time period, it's when public school began to be more of an idea because before then school was maybe you were like very rich and you went to like a fancy private school, or maybe if you were like one of a few, like the lucky one in a gigantic, let's say, Catholic family, one of you would get to go to some Catholic university or some small thing. But for working people, the school was the mine. Or yeah.
I mean, at this time, it's a time to wrangle those damn street kids,
Mm-hmm.
and there were like a handful of organizations that were funded, solely by donations, right? So it was at the will of people with money.
Right.
And so, again, these are poor kids' schools. But as these things started to come to fruition, it captured the middle class, imagination. And it began that, we want this. I mean, it's a good thing for the poor, so we must take it. And now it's ours.
Like, how do you think public schools were sort of used? I think because this is the thing I wonder about, right? Because this is also the era of the growth of American empire, right? Like the Spanish American War is sort of thought of as the beginning of American imperialism because, well, obviously we had been pretty imperialistic in the whole sense of like manifest destiny. Sort of the idea then of going way beyond our shores and getting into a war over Cuba and the Philippines and the expansion of that. To be able to have that kind of an empire, you probably need to indoctrinate people, especially if they're not getting much economically, right? So,
right.
This is also a time where you sort of need to start building that myth and building that sense of sort of that American promise or that American ideal,
right.
So I wonder, about that. Not that public schools are bad, obviously,
exactly.
But like how these institutions can still be used because of who has the power in society.
Exactly. And it requires the standardized or professionalization of core, educators and what school really meant at that time. And what a really good book that I've read is called Class War. It's by The Privatization of Childhood. It's by Megan Erickson. And she sums it up really well. And the excerpt is, the French philosopher Louis Althusser imagined schools as a place of direct indoctrination into the values of the most privileged and powerful members of society. Bowles and Gintis present far less mechanistic and more complex picture of schooling's place in society. These schools as integrated into the social and economic system and a place where youth are socialized into the discipline and disempowerment of the American workplace, and where specific sets of values cultivated in students through relationships with peers, teachers, and administrators, depending on what class they are from. Upper middle class kids may be encouraged to be articulate, confident, and to negotiate with adults. All personality traits that are required from supervisory white-collar jobs, and that, and I guess this more touches on, also can be pointed at, slave holders, right?
Totally.
Into, those that monopolize, the garment industry, right? Whereas middle class and lower class, working class kids may receive subtle cues that they should respect authority and become subordinate. So, it's a training for society and how they want society to turn out, right?
Exactly. Well, and just think about how that is still very true today. Like,
Absolutely.
think about the difference between what it would be like to go to a public school in, let's say, south of Seattle versus go to the Bush school, which is like the fancy private school
Exactly, or like the
over here,
Northwest
right?
school,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And like, and like, I'm going to be real. I went to some of those fancy schools because I come from a more like, my dad's a lawyer. My mom was able to
Right.
stay at home.
Well,
And I remember getting some of those messages, right?
yeah,
And
well,
then when
it's that thought that is money buys you better, right?
exactly.
So
But
the
then,
more
yeah. But then also sort of how some of these ideas that were instilling in these sort of upper class kids, so many of them are so much more like, like it's even like it just reflects how much more freedom they have and how much more liberty they have over their own lives, because for them it's not about how do you fit in and are you behaving correctly.
Well,
Exactly. Yeah, it's about exploration and art and and like I was lucky that I was able to do that, but like
it's
exactly.
Yeah.
But then when I went to a public high school, I was around kids who had a very different educational experience.
Yeah.
And that I think was honestly, I think it was good for me because like I think I kind of could I could smell bullshit, I guess, but like when you sort of see that, it lays bare a lot of the preposterousness of that. Just because you were born to particular parents, you deserve a particular kind of education and are like they're bred for it, and so that is one good thing about public schools. If we tax rich people enough, they can't afford to go to private schools to make their kids go to public school. So
the idea too, like as it came out, it was trying to be a good idea of, as a leveling project, right? An equal playing field. And if everybody, and that's a double-edged sword. It's like, it's also a way to blame the poor for being poor. It's like, well, it's your own fault because we had the same leveling, we had the same foothold, and well, you're there and I'm here, so I'm more successful, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, and that even gets into the sort of the absurdity of the idea of meritocracy in general, right? Because if let's say everything was equal, okay, it's equal for one generation, but then those people with more resources are able to maybe spend more time with their kids or get their kids tutors or give them better resources to play with or give them nannies.
People we
they are able to hire me. Just imagine how great that is.
It's like it's such an awful like feeling. Like it's like double-edged sword, right? Because you're like, I get paid more, but then you're also catering to the fucking elite, right?
Yeah.
And you're helping perpetuate these fucking little elitist shits. I'm sorry. I love kids, but like,
no, it's fine.
Just found in over time and being a nanny, and obviously like those that can afford nannies are, the upper class, the elite.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, something that I found is like, it doesn't matter how much I instill in those kiddos during the week, once that weekend comes and I come back on Monday, all is undone, right? Because, and it's not me like saying I know better about raising children, but there really is a different world and how what the family looks like and how children are raised and they're a little more laissez-faire. Honestly, we make those families' lives easier, right? They come home, their kids are either already fed or homework's already done. The parents just come home and they maybe make them dinner and then spend an hour with them and put their asses to bed, and we do the rest of the work. So yeah, I have a really hard time. Like, I haven't gone back to work. Finding another nanny job is, I'm just having a really fucking hard time bringing myself to work for the fucking rich, man.
Yeah. No, totally. I hear you, which is why you should go to patreon.com/RDB show.
Yeah.
All the money will go straight to Brynn's Venmo, I have promised.
We're doing fine. I got a professor podcaster husband.
Oh,
so, you
damn.
know, I'm kept, you know, they have a whole
Triple threat.
72. I'm just guessing at this point. It was 69, but 72 patrons a month.
Oh, yeah.
Whoop,
Oh,
whoop.
very cool. Very
so, you know,
cool.
we're rolling in that
rolling in that. And that's only split 3 ways. So that's
only split 3 ways. Yep.
Yeah, easy. Not a problem.
Actually, they've mostly been just like donating to you know, supplies for those that are out protesting, food,
right? Yeah,
and all that shit. But
yeah,
exactly. We're rolling.
I would do that if I had any patrons. So there you go.
Well, maybe someday we'll get patrons.
Maybe someday we'll be able to make a big show out of giving like $20 to someone.
Right.
It's always been my dream, just to be able to give like a tiny amount of money, but just like make a huge deal about it, you know?
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Although
kind of like Jeff Bezos, but we will definitely talk about him and his childcare center because it is like in my neighborhood. So that is not weird at all.
I am so excited to and horrified to get on that topic.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, going back to that, and you know, honestly, it's like that leveling the playing field. You know, those of us, the working class, want an equal footing, and the elite don't. You know,
right?
I mean,
exactly.
I mean, it's continuing and perpetuating class politics, or you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's how those hierarchies are able to exist, even when we supposedly live in a democracy and a place where you have the ability, theoretically, to move to, you know, upward mobility, right?
Right.
And it's how that continues to reproduce itself.
Right. Well, and, you know, just like you're saying, and then touching back, you know, it's like that equal footing. That's where that bootstrap mentality comes from, right? So it's like, oh, well, we have the same. Well, why can't you just pick yourself up by the bootstraps like I did, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then, you know, because they don't want their children, you know, the poor meshing with the rich, this is kind of where you get private schools and institutions, you know, private institutions.
Yeah, exactly. So, trying to think. I mean, we could definitely talk more about the progressive era. We could talk about, you know, all these different sort of changes that happened, and then there also, though, it's funny, you know, like you think of the progressive era, and that's always a term I've always had a little bit of trouble with. Progressive, because it's there's a lot of reasons. There's like the historical thing that American progressive movement was not really like a left movement. It was like a liberalizing, but still like elite capitalist focused movement, right? So
really yeah. I mean, if you look at like women's right to vote, right? So that was all a bunch of rich white ladies, right? So you're absolutely
and they also wanted to you know, ban booze, you know, like that was part of it, right? And that was a way to sort of like criminalize a lot of like immigrant communities, right? You know,
well, and it's that moral panic again, right?
Exactly,
we all have to be Yep.
Yeah, which of course them doing that was actually good for one side of my it was good for one side of my family and bad for one side of my family, because on the Irish side it was bad because they couldn't get their booze, but on the Jewish side it was good because they were in the mafia, so they were able to they were able to sell to the other side of my family, so they were able to make a little money, but I don't think that was the intention.
Right. Well, I mean, my great grandmother was a rum runner.
Really?
She
Awesome.
used to still rum, whiskey, and wine under her house. Yep.
There you go. Yep. There you go. Yeah,
and she was an immigrant. She's Yugoslavian, so you know.
Oh, awesome. I
Oh yeah,
love my Balkan brothers and sisters.
same. Sin.
Absolutely. No offense to my Polish brother-in-law, but definitely the coolest Slavs by a mile.
Right?
By a mile. Yeah. No. Yeah, totally. Well, and and how even in times when we get very positive reforms that in many ways can empower the working class,
Mm-hmm.
how we have to make sure that we are the ones who are in control.
Right.
That
right.
because there are some of these values that can be used to then criminalize other aspects of the broad working class that can be something like from prohibition or to some of these moral ideas around schooling to
Yeah.
then like some ideas that might happen later. We're probably not going to get to this, but
Yeah.
I think about the scare around like rap music and
Oh
rock
my
music,
God. Oh yeah.
like different sort of cultural expressions that then can become some a way to explain the inequalities that capitalism will inherently be creating, right?
Yeah.
I guess let's go on to the New Deal and I guess the Great Depression too. And it seems like listeners, if you're still listening, we're probably going to end up splitting this this section into two parts. So that means you're going to have to listen to the next episode of it.
That's how we get you.
That's how we get you. To sort of, so if you want to hear about childcare after World War II, you should subscribe. Go to rdbshow.com and hey, you can subscribe on one of your podcast things. I don't know how people listen to podcasts anymore. There's like a million ways. I have my way and I'm not telling anyone. But so after the progressive era, we have the roaring 20s, which were, I guess, fun, but also complicated. Let's say complicated, and then of course,
say the least.
and then of course, 1929, the Great Depression begins, and this ends up, according to scholarly research that I read, and I totally have right in front of me, became a moment when a lot of the building of these institutions and the beginning of public education and different sort of childcare institutions sort of began to roll back because, well, they depended on tax revenue. They depended on people not people needing care for their kids because they were working and hey, no one had a job.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in that time period it pulled back, and I'm sure we could go at some other time to talk sort of maybe about the ways that people filled those gaps in that era.
I mean, that's a whole interesting and fascinating,
and also like a very applicable to right now kind of topic. Just hearing about the ways that people in the coronavirus pandemic are having to sort of fill in these gaps, especially if they can't afford to get private childcare. Groups of parents working together to sort of fill those gaps. But it was a slightly different time in the Great Depression in the early 1930s. But in reaction to that, to the Great Depression and the basically cowardice and just complete failure in the Hoover administration, in comes Teddy Roosevelt's much cooler cousin, the guy who was played by Bill Murray in that movie where he has sex with his cousin, which is cool, I guess. Do you know that movie? Do you know that whole thing? I mean, we don't want to speak too bad. I mean, FDR is complicated guy. He's not a socialist by any means. Maybe a soft social democrat, but he was a different kind of liberal than we have now, to say the least.
Oh yeah.
But so in that we begin the reforms and the changes that become known as the New Deal. And
Uh-huh.
it's interesting, how, and this is a reason why, even if you feel like the movements you're involved with or you really care about, maybe if you feel like they're not winning and you don't see a way for them to win in the immediate term, a lot of the ideas that were sort of being floated and became really prominent in the populist movement and the People's Party in the 1890s sort of echoed throughout that generation into the new deal and became really a part of that idea of sort of what a better government could be. And while they were dealing with the massive contradictions of America, we were never really able, I think, to truly complete the new deal. I feel
Right.
like we still have a very long way to go, and I think we would need to basically become like a socialist state to reach that point.
Oh
But
yeah, absolutely.
like we would need a lot more like equality and like worker control. But the like a lot, but the changes made and the work done by that previous generation really echoed in the New Deal ideas, and in that came a massive expansion of public schools and government funding into all levels of education. And it's important though to not just think of this as and this is why like the New Deal era, I think, for someone on the left should have a lot more positive lessons than something like the progressive era, because the labor movement was a lot more involved, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, just that with the labor movement, it showed people, that there could be a collective spirit amongst the working class, and to work together to get the things that they, felt that they needed, right?
Right.
And again, that's the greater buy-in, on state projects. And then, as we touch on this, thinking about like international context, like the Soviet Union, and there was all these education projects there, and that excitement around that.
Yes.
And
For sure.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's an important thing that I think we sometimes kind of forget. While the ruling class in America was because they were capitalist and, well, a lot of them had a lot of money tied up in Tsarist Russia, there was a lot of hope internationally as as the Tsar fell, and as there was a sort of opening for a new order. And
I mean, there was hope.
Yeah, exactly. There was like real hope, and I'm sure we'll get to the to World War II at some point. But FDR's vice president was probably the most left wing person we've ever had, and that high up in the federal government, Henry Wallace, and he was a strong believer in having a cooperative relationship with the Soviet Union and the United States.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to have what eventually became the Cold War. And that there was a real chance in that moment to as the old empires fell, as the British Empire sort of was disintegrating, as the French Empire was disintegrating, and sort of the reconstruction of Germany after World War II, there was a real chance for that. And I think it's like I didn't know about that. I didn't learn about that in my education, in my childhood, right? And it's a interesting thing, I think, for us to think about when working with kids and trying to explain the world, that we have these enemies, let's say, or sort of these foes, as you explain to children what the world is, but that there were people, and sometimes really close to power, who wanted to have a different world. But as World War II rolled forward, how did that affect childcare, because this would have been a time when more people were being put to work,
Right.
And beyond just World War II, there was more like public jobs programs happening through the New Deal, but specifically because you can't ignore in this era these sort of gender dynamics,
Exactly.
and as the men were being drafted at very high numbers, there was a lot of work having to be done to make the necessities to keep the country going and to supply the war machine, which has its pluses and minuses, let's say, but
Right.
A lot of those workers were women. So that's
where you get the Rosie of the Riveter and the Riveter,
exactly,
right?
Yes.
So it didn't become the women power sort of thing until much later. But
right,
if you're looking at that, you've got all these women in doing men's jobs, right? Because the men are at war. Well, a lot of these women are, because their husbands are at war, but most of them have children. What do you do with the children, right?
Right.
So, here again, we're revisiting the moral panic of the children, right? Think of the children.
Right.
And, if mothers are working, who are watching the children? And, this is where you find, children, the concept of latchkey kids, which I myself was a latchkey kid, but, but yeah, the concept of a latchkey kid where, you could find children sleeping in locked cars as moms, work the night shift, or, being left alone, and again, like I said, the revisiting the moral panic and this idea that children are getting over the working is maternal deprivation, right?
Right.
Yeah. And, it's once again, you need the women to work and be strong. But then at the same time, it's as it no longer benefits the economy and those monopolizing, the elite, like it no longer benefits them, then women need to be back in their place. And that is in the home with the children, right? So it's, demonizing those, after the war, those that could went back home, but the poor women are still working. Right. So again, it's demonizing the poor, right? We're back to where we started.
Exactly. Well, and this is a thought I never really had, but it's kind of interesting how, two of the most important social movements post-war are the civil rights movement and the second wave feminism, which, as millennials, we know plenty of critiques, honestly, of both, but especially of second wave feminism.
Oh, yeah.
But when the country needed to, to maximize what it could do with its citizenry, it kind of had to break through some of those social ideas about sort of who deserves to be able to contribute, right? But then when the war is over, they have to recreate that. So it's kind of similarly to the stories of World War II veterans who fought fascism coming back and then being treated like second class citizens again, right?
Yeah.
Or the women who were able to maybe serve as medics or in especially in manufacturing, who then become squeezed back, and then that again can create a sort of echo throughout the next few decades of this realization that, well, you needed us then, why not, why don't I deserve I deserve an equal piece of the pie. And that will lead us to our next episode. But that was so much fun to do our first hour together. Yay. I love doing it. That is so exciting. Yes.
Yes. I'm just like you, super excited, and there's just so much to cover, and
yeah. So for real, everybody, please spread the word. Really, this is something both Brynn and I have really been wanting to do for a while. So thanks for listening to Red Diaper Baby. a show about capitalism, crisis, and childcare. If you really like the show, give us a review on iTunes. This is the thing that actually matters. Like with my old show, it actually mattered. I got more listeners when I got reviews. So
please.
People actually look at this stuff. I'm telling you.
You're already on the interwebs. Type in something on Twitter. So
just do it.
Direct it towards us.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And if you really like the show, you can send financial support at patreon.com/RDB show. And we'll give you a shout out at the end of each episode. Sadly, no one has because, this is the first episode. So no one gets a shout out. But I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. And that was Brynn.
And that was Ben.
And that was Red Diaper Baby. Thanks, everybody.
Guys.
Bye-bye.